welcome to the library once again. We're so pleased to have you with us, and this promises to be an engaging and memorable event. Today we have the honor of hosting a special guest whose talents span the world of stage, screen, and interactive storytelling. Roger Clark has been a professional actor for over 25 years, performing across nearly 50 countries. A graduate of the University of I'm sorry if I'm going to mispronounce this. Is it Glamorgan? Okay, I was going to say Glamorgan. Glamorgan in Wales, where he earned his degree in theater, media, and drama. Roger has built an impressive and diverse career. He is perhaps best known for his critically acclaimed portrayal of Arthur Morgan in Rockstar Games' Red Dead Redemption 2, a role that earned him the Best Performance Award at the 2018 Game Awards and a BAFTA Games Awards nomination. Roger's recent theater work includes standout performances as Henry VIII in A Man for All Seasons and Bradley in Buried Child at the Shakespeare Theater in New Jersey, as well as Theseus in A Midsummer Night's Dream at Theater for a New Audience. In addition to acting, Roger is also a filmmaker. His latest short film, Damn Handy, earned recognition on the National Festival Circuit, including a screening at the Mystic Film Festival. Roger now lives in Connecticut with his beautiful family and brings his industry expertise to the next generation of creators as part of the Game and Design Development faculty at Quinnipiac University. Please join me in welcoming Roger Clark. Just making sure this works.
It doesn't have to work. It's all good. Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming.
Ooh, there it does work. All right, there you go.
Thank you.
And
Thank you so
pin
much.
this on. No, thank you.
Oh,
I'm going to
wow.
pin this on you.
Very good.
And you're good to go.
These microphones have gotten so small, haven't they? It's easier and easier to lose. Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. I don't need that. But thank you for the wonderful introduction, Millie. It's an honor to be here. This place is very close to my heart. I've been visiting Lord's Point and Stonington and Mystic for over a decade. It's home to my in-laws, the wonderful people who gave birth to my beautiful wife. And yeah, it's a real pleasure to be here. Just a brief synopsis of what we're going to be going over today. I'm very passionate about performance capture, which was most of my work on Red Dead Redemption 2, and indeed most of the work I've done for video games. And it's an amazing medium that is exploding in front of our very eyes. And the technology for it just keeps getting better and better. And it offers more opportunity, more freedom, and some really interesting things. And not only in the games industry, but we're starting to see a lot of it in film and television as well. A little bit more about myself. I'm from New Jersey originally, but I grew up in Ireland. Hence the weird accent. And yeah, you pronounced it right. I trained at the University of Glamorgan, which has now moved on to become University of South Wales. And I began my career in the UK. I started out doing theater, and I really love theater. And I think as an actor, personally speaking, I think it's the best way to learn how to act, because the audience is right there. You know, and they'll tell you what works and what doesn't work pretty fast. Unlike film, for example, you know, where it could be a year or two before it shows cases in front of an audience, and by then it's too late to change anything, and you might not learn anything either. So, personally speaking, I've been able to use all of the skills that I learned in theater in every other medium that I've performed in, which includes, as Millie pointed out, voiceover, voice acting, performance capture, film, and television. And I've been lucky enough to dive in and produce some short films here in the Connecticut region as well. And we've had a lot of fun screening stuff here at the Mystic Film Festival, along with some other amazing Connecticut natives that are really contributing some amazing stuff to the film industry. New England's got a lot to offer, and I see that at Quinnipiac. And you know, it's a real shame because, you know, New York and New Jersey, they are offering all these tax incentives and whatnot. And I think Connecticut could really we could offer a few more tax incentives too. I think there's more than just those two states that should be hogging all the work. I think we have a lot to offer as well. But to begin with, full performance capture. So what is full performance capture? I guess a definition would be most appropriate to start with. You might have heard motion capture in the past. There are many similarities between that and full performance capture. Full performance capture typically is motion capture, which I'll get into in a second, and audio, your voice, your audio is being recorded simultaneously, as well as your facial capture. You have, more often than not these days, you'll be wearing a helmet with a big LED light pointed right in your face with a small HD camera, and that captures all of your facial movements, and then the animators take all that and incorporate it into a digital version of you or your avatar, and that is then the performance. But it goes way, way back further than that. Today, that's the modern equivalent. But I think when acting first began, I think there was the precursor to full performance capture that we could incorporate as masks. Many people have said that full performance capture is digital makeup, and I don't really disagree with that comparison. And there are many theater practitioners around today that say when an actor or a performer puts on a mask, it takes away their ability to lie to the audience. And what does that mean? You know, most of the tools we use to lie are in our face, you know, or in our voice. But it's very difficult to lie with your body. You know, our body language often betrays our true intentions. And I think the very first performers who incorporated a lot of mask work realized this, and they used that to their advantage. Rotoscope, I think, is another precursor to what we currently use in performance capture. I'll be getting into that as well. And the actual technology of motion capture began, I think, early 80s. And that was often used more for anatomical studies, funnily enough. Golf professionals and basketball professionals were using it to analyze their swing, their dunks, and whatnot. And that was the beginning of that specific type of technology. But we'll start with masks. Now, some of the masks that we found, some masks are like close to 10,000 years old. And they incorporate in almost universally in theater practicing all around the world, independent from one another. And it's really quite fascinating, some of the similarities that pop up in these completely different cultures. I think these two are Greek, but one of the ones I'm particularly interested about is No Theater in Japan, NOH. That's some of this stuff here. It started out in the 13th century. And what you'll see here are some very staple characters, which no audiences began to know, and no pun intended, and began to understand. Staple characters, stereotypical characters that the audience could identify with. This guy looks pretty evil, you know. This is probably a fair maiden. And similar stories would often repeat themselves as the audience became more and more accustomed to the stereotypical characters. Another very famous and well-known theater practice from Japan would be kabuki. Kabuki was a little more modern. I think it began in the 17th century, and a little bit less mask work, but they did incorporate very detailed makeup. And again, these forms of makeup would elicit exactly which type of characters they were and portraying. And that's set up in India as well with the theater practitioner called Kathakali. And again, audiences had a very good understanding of how these characters were portrayed, not just with mask and not just with makeup, but also in their physicality and in the way that they moved. Audiences were actually quite sophisticated back then, and it often wouldn't take them more than a microsecond to know exactly which character was which. And as we get a bit closer to the Western world now, this is Commedia dell'arte from Renaissance Italy. And that was pretty interesting in many ways too, because that began to incorporate the performers' voices. I think Kabuki did a little bit too, but no, it was typically silent. Commedia dell'arte used vocal language, but, well, as you may know, in Italy back then, it was a very, very, they were making a lot of money. Very, very successful, very financial capital of Europe at the time. And tradesmen from all over Europe were flocking to Florence, Rome, to practice their wares. The best masons were coming from Scandinavia and what have you. And they all spoke different languages, but they all attended the same forms of theater. So the Commedia dell'arte practitioners, they invented a form of gibberish called Gramelot. And if you had ever watched a Pingu cartoon from back in the 80s or 90s, you know what I'm talking about, the little penguin, right? Who would go, blah, 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 blah. That was very similar to what Gramelot was used in with Commedia dell'arte. And again, the masks were used to portray very definitive and stereotypical characters. This one probably the most famous, who went on to evolve into many, many different types of stereotypical characters that we still recognize today. In Italy, he would have been called Arlecchino, but we know him better as the Harlequin. He evolved into Punch and Judy puppetry that we often see. That was very popular in 19th and 20th century Britain, and he was often the main protagonist of the Commedia dell'arte stories. He was working class, he was clever, and he often gave the upper class and the landlord, and he would give them their due, and the audience obviously ate that up. And he was very funny too, but he had a very specific way of moving, and his costume, as well as his mask, would give him away as him being the main protagonist of the stories. There was another one, guy called Pantalino, I think his name was, and he had a big beer belly, and he walked in a very specific way. And then there was usually a love interest too that Arlecchino would either get unrequited or requited love from, depending on the story. But these are all different forms of theater that developed independently from each other, for the most part, and they all incorporated so many of similarities. And the primary thing being is that they used masks to not only hide who they were individually, but to communicate who their character was without saying a word to their audience. And that's something that really hasn't changed that much even in today's world when we use performance capture. So, you know what this is, right? Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. I think it came out in '39. I think it was also one of Disney's first ever feature film cartoons. And right here we have an example of rotoscope. So I remember when I went and saw Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, I think I was a kid in the 80s and it was being re-released. And I was blown away by how natural Snow White danced. You know, she had a long flowing dress and the way she would twirl, it just looked like it was exactly real. And it blew me away. And I thought, how did the animators do that? Well, they used a technique called rotoscope. And there's a better explanation of it right there that you might be able to get a better understanding of. So they would project, let me go back to the other thing and show you that image on the left. So Snow White did have a performer, I forget her name, but I'm sure Google would be able to tell you very clearly what it was. They filmed her dancing. She was trained in ballet. She danced beautifully, as we still enjoy today. And they then took that film and projected it, not dissimilar to the way you see this right here. And a team of animators, probably not as many as we would expect, they painstakingly traced every single frame so that they could make it and turn it into an animation. And this is the first iteration of what I consider performance capture as we know it today. It's fascinating. and a lot of work. Took a long, long time. If you can imagine, every single frame. And Walt Disney, I don't know how many animators he employed for the Snow White movie, but it's probably less than what we think. Some of the modern day applications of performance capture, which was the natural evolution, I think, of rotoscope, is film and video games. And now we're seeing it more often in TV today, too. Are there any Star Wars fans? All right, so the Emmys just got announced yesterday. And Alan Tudyk, who plays that one of the androids, KS-290, is that his name? Yeah, so they gave him, he got an Emmy nomination, which is wonderful, but it's an Emmy nomination for voiceover, which really grinds my gears, because it's not voiceover what he did. It was full performance capture. But of course, you know, there isn't much work around today to constitute having its own category in award ceremonies, but still, it was a missed opportunity to raise awareness, which is why I'm very grateful to tell you all about it today. But yes, that rotoscope went on to evolve into performance capture, and one of the main ways that we use it today is with film and video games. Here's one example. This is actually theater. I don't know if I need this. You guys can hear me in the back, right? Cool. So, The Tempest went on at the RSC in Stratford-upon-Avon in England, and they've done obviously so many versions of this production. But in 2016, they actually incorporated performance capture. And one of the unique things about that was that it was the first time, to my knowledge, that it was incorporated in a live performance. So with Tempest, you got Prospero, and he's stranded on this deserted island with his daughter Miranda, and he's managed to tame or curb some of the local spirits on that island. And one of them is Ariel. Ariel is elemental, he or she, I've often seen them depicted as either one. They are from the air, they're ethereal, and they have a lot of power. So what the RSC did in 2016 is they employed an actor to do the motion capture backstage in real time. And then that image then of what they were doing live was projected on stage as a live actor interacted with it. Their voice would be broadcast within the theater, and it was a fascinating, innovative first, and very interesting. And this is typically what you would see, even today, for a full performance capture performer. They wear a very tight spandex suit with all these balls all over it. They've got a helmet with a tusk, or sometimes multiple tusks, and that's then pointed into their face with the camera and the lighting. And then there's usually there's plenty of sensors suspended from the ceiling, which reads all of the balls and translates that data into a digital version of the character, as we see right there. Another very good example of this was even more recently, ABBA did a world tour or performance. But it was them in the basement of I think it was Benny's house somewhere in London. And they put on the suits and they broadcast this performance live to multiple concert stadiums and venues all over the world. And it showed them as they were in the 70s and 80s, even though it was them. So although it was a live performance that was broadcast, all the audience members saw them as they were in the 70s and 80s, which is pretty amazing. Does anybody know who this guy is? Yes, all right, cool. This guy is a pioneer of performance capture. When the role that he became known for first came about, it wasn't very popular. But since then, I think audiences have started to come to understand better what it actually was that he did and how much of an innovator he really was. He was Jar Jar Binks. Yeah. And, he had the forethought while he was doing that. He knew that Jar Jar Binks' eyes were not going to be where his eyes were. So he spoke to George Lucas and he said, can you just make sure that everyone else in the scene, because everyone else in the scene was not performance captured, it was real film. He wanted to make sure that he was giving them the appropriate eye line. So he had a little mask built on top of his helmet to make sure that Liam Neeson and Ewan McGregor were looking right into Jar Jar Binks' eyes as they were speaking to him. All of this forward thinking that never had to be done before. Ahmed Best was the first to do it. Does anybody know who this guy is? Yeah. Most of us have seen behind the scenes footage of Andy Serkis working in performance capture, the first one being Gollum in the Lord of the Rings trilogy. And then he went on to do so much more too with King Kong and Planet of the Apes. He took this medium and he really started to make it be recognized as a genuine way to perform and act. And he started up a motion capture studio in London called Imaginarium 2, which is still being used to this day. And not many people deny that the work he did as Gollum was pretty insane. Because he often did those scenes at least twice, if not 3 times. So he would work side by side with Elijah Wood and Sean Astin so that they could interact with him as Gollum appropriately. But then he would have to do it again within the motion capture studio so that they could get his movement and animations down pat. And he would have to look at what he had done earlier with Sean and Elijah for reference to make sure that he accurately recreated it. Because you don't want an arm moving through one guy's neck or what have you. And that's not easy, I can tell you. Looking back and trying to recreate a performance exactly as you did it, sometimes 3 or 4, sometimes 6 months previously, is quite a challenge. And then oftentimes he would also then have to do what we call ADR, which stands for additional dialogue recording, where he would be in a booth then, and then he would recreate the vocal performance. I did that with Red Dead Redemption 2 as well, although the majority of the audio would have been done whilst we were doing the performance capture. Benedict Cumberbatch is another good example. So you can see he's got loads of dots on his face there. Benedict Cumberbatch, he employed performance capture for another Hobbit, Lord of the Rings movie. I think it was the Hobbit movies, where he played the dragon, Smaug. And one of the notable and really cool things about Benedict is that he wanted to incorporate himself physically into the role, even though he did not share the same attributes as the dragon the size of a house. So you can look it up on YouTube, and he's writhing around on the floor, doing all this crazy and amazing stuff. And then, once the film came out, they let him know, we only really used your face. And even then, the animators had to greatly distort certain aspects so that they could get the snout appropriate and get his mouth and lips moving just as it would as if he were a dragon. But you got to admire his commitment to the role. And something's got to be said too. I mean, if ever you physically inhabit a role like the way he did, I don't think it does any harm whatsoever. So like I said earlier, two of the main ways in which performance capture is being employed nowadays is with film and television and with gaming, video games. But they're 2 very different ways to work. And what are those differences? Well, I can say with video games, there are 2 different types of performance capture. There's performance capture for cutscenes, and then there's performance capture for in-game animations. Now, a cutscene, those of you who are familiar with video games, you finally killed a boss, and a cutscene will come on where you can put down the controller and you can have your reward for defeating a big boss. Or in other situations, it sets up the mission for your next goal to achieve in the game. And it can be very cinematic. And in those instances, where the camera is set, and it is preset by the director of the video game. And it really isn't that dissimilar to the performance capture that's employed in film. But in-game animations is where it gets a lot more tricky, because usually, and especially with Red Dead Redemption 2, which is what we call an open world or a sandbox game, the player has control. So it is quite an immersive deep control, and they can control where the camera is going to be. So you have no idea. Now, typically it's going to be a wide shot. You know, it's not many close-ups in game because the player wants to be able to see as much of their environment as is possible. But, well, it often means that your performance does have to lean a bit more to the theatrical side of things, whereas cutscenes can be much more filmic. Because you're probably more likely to have a close-up in a cutscene, you can afford to be a lot more subtle in your performance. But with in-game animations, oftentimes you have to be a little bit bigger. You have to be a little bit more expressive physically. And as graphics have improved through time, this has become less of an issue, but it's still a significant difference. Where's the camera going to be? Well, if it's in-game, you just simply do not know. So that's when you often, the comparison of theater in the round is often used, where the audience could be and often is on either or any side of you. So you have to make sure that everyone gets a fair eye line from any one scene. Here's some terminology for performance capture. You've already heard me say PCAP. That's performance capture. And mocap is motion capture. The big differences between the two is motion capture does not concern itself often with facial or with audio. That's usually done by the stunt performers. We had amazing stunt performers on Red Dead 2. Most of them went on and did a lot of work for the Netflix Marvel series, like the first couple of seasons of Daredevil and Punisher and Luke Cage. They were amazing. And those guys, they would never put the head cams on a stunt performer because they'd be broken within 30 seconds. And they cost a lot of money. So they would put on what you would call a skull cap. And they didn't need their voice because it was strictly for the purposes of motion. The volume is effectively the stage. It's the area where your performance can be reliably recorded. If you step outside of the volume, which is a specific boundary which will be marked, then the sensors aren't going to be able to reliably capture all of your balls. And then the performance gets a little disrupted. So the stage in which you perform is referred to as the volume. The T-pose, that I'll show you before I explain it. You've probably seen it before. This is the T-pose right here. And with film, when you see you often see people do the slate before they start filming a scene. They'll take one, and that is to sync up the audio with the film. It's to help the editor know what the scene is, how many takes they've done, etc., etc. Well, the T-pose is very similar to that for the purposes of performance capture. It helps the animator know when the scene begins and ends. And it also helps the animators know if there's multiple actors in the scene, it helps them know which is which. Oftentimes, especially, it doesn't happen as much now because the technology's gotten better, but if two actors were standing right next to each other during a scene, oftentimes the sensors would struggle knowing whose arm is whose, and then you would see some really weird stuff. But they got better and better at incorporating that and avoiding that as the technology got better, and one of the reasons why is the T-pose. ROM, that's not read-only memory like it is with computing. That stands for, in PCAP, range of motion. So another way that they help prevent confusion from the sensors is every actor, once they've suited up and they've gotten their balls all in the right place, usually around joints and what have you, they go in to the volume and they perform what's called a range of motion. Every studio does it differently, but what they all do is they all incorporate all of the joints being moved in every possible way. And it helps the sensors uniquely identify each performer, because each performer's balls is not going to be in the exact same place as another performer's. So the range of motion, the ROM, it helps the sensors know which performer is which, so that when they are standing right next to each other, or if they're engaged in a kiss or an embrace, or they're fighting, it won't confuse and mangle up their limbs. And when you see that happening, it's quite fun. But it makes sure that that doesn't happen. Previs is short for pre-visualization. So in the early days of mocap, well, no, let me first explain what it is. So nowadays with performance capture, in real time, what you will see more often than not is there'll be a big, huge screen in the studio right next to the volume where the actors can see themselves. And it would happen every time. You know, we saw a new performer who had never done it before, and their first time walking into the volume, they'd always do the same thing. They'd go, wow, this suit's so weird. Wait a minute, hang on a minute. Oh my gosh, that's me. That's me. Oh, wow. And they would always do this, and we would give them 5 minutes to get over it, and then we would work on. But the pre-visualization was so useful because it helped us know whether the take was any good or not. But in performance capture's earlier days, it was a lot more tricky because the amount of data and memory needed to be able to transmit the actor's movements live into their avatar, it's a lot of technology and data. And when performance capture first started, it was really only just lines, dots and lines, you know. But some of them were so good at it, even that was helpful because they would be able to tell who was who. And it took a fine eye to learn it, but pre-visualization is the way that we can tell whether a take is good or not. The face cam is what you saw earlier. Bennett, there's a good shot of that's the face cam right there. Nowadays, it's not really necessary to have these dots on your face. But for Benedict, I think it was more necessary because it really helped to, like I said, the dragon's face had so much different dimension than Benedict's. But most of the time now, it's just the tusk with the camera. Those dots, and when I first started working in mocap, we often used those dots. But it was a real pain because as soon as you started sweating, they'd fall off. And, you know, little idiosyncratic things that you do as a human being, just, you know, mid-scene, and then all of a sudden your upper lip is just completely gone. And there would have to be some studios would use facial ROMs too. So that whole thing where you make sure that you're moving every joint, sometimes you would have to do that facially as well if a ball got knocked off. So you'd have to be grinning and scowling like an idiot for the facial ROM too. So yes, the face cams. Face cams were a pretty expensive piece of equipment. When I first started, the cameras were only in standard definition. But once they switched to HD, the LEDs got so much brighter. And it was almost blinding in many circumstances, but you got used to it in the end. In-game is something that I mentioned before. That's whenever the player has control of the video game. You can refer to that as in-game. Vertical slice, that's less of a performance capture term, to be honest with you, but more of a gaming term. When you're in the midst of developing a video game, before it's finished, a vertical slice will be like a little piece that you could send to your boss just to let them know what you've been working on. And then the boss then sends that to the people who are funding it to make sure if they're happy or not. The environment. This is, every day you work in performance capture, the volume's the same. You know, you go to the same studio and you're standing in the same volume. But you really need to have a good understanding of what the actual environment that your avatar is in. And the best way to learn this is to speak and communicate with the animators. One of the biggest differences about working on a set, like a film set and a performance capture set, is that the animator plays a huge, much more big role in performance capture. On a film set, you'd mostly talk to the director, maybe the writers. But on a performance capture set, you're talking to the animators almost as much as you are the director. Because the animators are the only ones that have a specific and a very deep and unique understanding of the environment that your avatar is going to be working in. The avatar is you, by the way. So you want to know if it's cold, you want to know if it's raining, you want to know if it's day or night. There are sets on a performance capture volume, but those sets are only, they're only dimensionally accurate. You know, if it's a door, the door's going to be in the right place and it's going to be as tall and as wide as it should be. But it's pipes and scaffolding. You know, you don't know whether it's wood, you don't know how heavy it is. These are all questions that is your responsibility as the performer to ask the narrators. And once you get all those details into your head, it allows you to come up with a better performance, something that's going to immerse the audience in a more genuine way. Cutscenes, again, I think I covered that earlier. Cutscenes are the more filmic part of gaming, when often the camera angles are predetermined, and that's the point where the player can maybe put down the controller and see some narrative progression, or the next objective gets set up. Branching narratives, one of the things that video games has that film doesn't is that your choices have consequences. And now it's getting sophisticated enough so that those choices can actually lead to different endings within the game. So it's a bit of an algebraic nightmare for some, trying to figure out how many times you're going to branch out. It can get a little crazy. But it just helps with the immersiveness for the player. And no two people should have the same story when they play video games nowadays, at least for open world sandbox things like I did with Red Dead Redemption 2. The reference camera. So all the behind the scenes stuff that we've all seen, like with Avatar and Planet of the Apes and whatnot, when we see them in the ridiculous spandex, that was done and filmed with a reference camera. So oftentimes, like I was saying earlier before, when Andy Serkis was maybe re-performing his lines in the booth, he would be shown the reference video of what they did on the day to help him recreate exactly what he had done before. And it's vital, it's vital. I did a lot of ADR for Red Dead Redemption 2 as well. And in those instances, they would play the reference video so that I could go, oh yes, now I know what I'm doing. The skull cap. The skull cap is what the stunt performers wear when they don't need a face cam. Sometimes if your facial data isn't important, sometimes you'll put on a skull cap as well. It's just a cap that has additional balls on it, just so they know which way your head's turning. It's to save money and time so that they don't need to record the facial data. Performance capture and voice acting. Not the same thing. Everybody thinks it is. I've spent a long time explaining the differences. Not too much benefit. However, we all know Andy Serkis. He's become a pioneer of performance capture and a great actor in his own right on film. But does anybody know who the gentleman on the right is? Yeah, Mel Blanc. Personally, in my opinion, the best voice actor that ever lived. He was Bugs Bunny, as well as many, 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 many others. There's a great, I forget where it's from, but I think they were interviewing the cast of The Simpsons, and Hank Azaria and many other actors, they praised Mel Blanc. And one of the examples that they give as to how good he actually was, so he was Bugs Bunny, but he was also Daffy Duck. He was Foghorn Leghorn. Sylvester. I'm not gonna say everything he did, but there's one scene where Bugs Bunny and Daffy Duck are impersonating each other, and they have an argument. I don't know how he did that. Just try to imagine Bugs Bunny pretending to be Daffy Duck, and Daffy Duck pretending to be Bugs Bunny, and then doing that dialogue live. That's how good Mel Blanc was. And the work was very, very different to performance capture. One of the biggest differences is that in voice acting, it's often a solitary way to perform. You're in a booth by yourself, more often than not. And with video games, you're often not getting the script until maybe, if you're lucky, a day before. I've very often was the case for me. I was handed the pages as I went into the booth. So that's what there's a lot of cold reading going on. And you had to basically create something using only one tool of expression, your voice. And you're often doing it on the fly, by yourself. Performance capture, you have a lot more liberty as a performer, because if you're performing a scene, And you're doing it not that dissimilar to film. You're rehearsing it with your scene partners. The director is with you, making sure he or she tells you exactly how they want it. And apart from the fact that you all look ridiculous in spandex, it's not that dissimilar to film or theater because you're working together, your characters are bouncing off of each other, and I think, and oftentimes that can come up with a more authentic, more real way of performing. You know, animators are brilliant, and like I said before, what the work that they do with rotoscoping and tracing every single frame. Animators often can't recreate just simple human nature. And one of the biggest reasons why is because of simple time constraints. You know, some guy's got an itch on his head. And an animator isn't going to do that on the fly without their boss's permission. That's like, you know, back in the day, that right there would have been an extra day's work. With performance capture, you have the luxury of it not taking that long. But still, an animator isn't going to create more work for themselves if they have to, which is one of the brilliant things about performance capture, because it still showcases the animator's talents, but now they're working hand in hand with the performers as well. And we come up with some really amazing things. The future of performance capture. The technology continues to blow up. And what we're starting to see now is the studio isn't as necessary as it used to be. These sensors that I was talking about, which are very expensive pieces of equipment suspended from the ceiling, they're starting to be able to move them into real situations and real film sets. And it's now getting to the point where you don't even have to have the balls on anymore. At Quinnipiac, they have what is called a markerless studio, which means you don't have to put on that spandex, you don't have to have all the balls, you don't have to do the range of motion. And this is going to change the industry in an innovative way once again. You can do facial capture with an app on your phone now. There's a video game out at the moment called Expedition 33, I believe, and I saw behind the scenes footage for it, and their face cams are iPhones. And it's just the camera from an iPhone. It's still attached to the helmet with a tusk, but the equipment for everything is becoming much, much more accessible. All of the tools for filmmaking and recording music and all of that stuff is becoming much more accessible than it ever used to be. There's no excuse not to create art anymore. What the real challenge now is, I often find, is getting an audience, getting eyeballs on it, because we as an audience are inundated with content now. I know some people hate that word, but that's what it is, you know. We have literally millions of hours of things to choose what we want to watch. So the real challenge now is not acquiring the equipment to tell your story, but finding a way to tell your story to the audience. That's it. That's it. Thank you. Well, thank you very much. I say that's it, but obviously I'm going to ask if there are any questions. Yes, sir.
My son told me a story. He told me a story about some ADR you had to do once from Red Dead, specifically regarding lines with your horse. I wondered if you would share that with us.
Yes, yes, absolutely true. So, yeah, for those of you who may or may not know, in Red Dead Redemption 2, you have a horse, and you're reliant on that horse for transporting yourself all over the map, and it's a very important relationship, and it's not just any horse. You have the same horse, and the longer you keep your horse, the higher there's a bonding level. It goes from 1 to 4. And level 1 bonding with your horse, you just got them, okay? They might not follow your commands as quickly. They may not trust you as much, so they'll be spooked out by a snake much, much worse than if, for example, you had a level 4 bonding. If you have a level 4 bonding with your horse, you guys communicate very well together. It'll walk backwards. It'll do whatever you ask it to. You can call it to you from a further distance away, and it'll respond to your commands much, much faster, and it won't get spooked by snakes and mountain lions. But anyway, there's button prompts where you can go, oh, good girl, or good boy. And I had to do a lot of these horse lines, you know, because there's so much, most of the game you're riding on a horse. And that was one of the aspects that actually was voice acting, because some of the in-game dialogue was done in a booth, and that was done in a booth. It took a few days, and I remember going back in after a few weeks had passed, and one of my assistant directors said to me, "We got to do the horse lines again." I said, "Why?" And he said, "It sounds a little too intimate." I was like, "What do you mean?" And he says, here, just play and listen. And yeah, it sounded, you know, "You're all right, girl." Easy, girl. Yeah, it did sound a little provocative, I have to say. But for any of you who've played the game, the stuff that they did decide to use, it still sounds pretty bad. But of course, you know, I mean, I know some players, specifically, they go, no, I need a female horse. I'm not getting a male horse, I'm getting a female horse. And apparently it's for that specific reason. But yeah, I had to re-record the horse lines, yeah. Yes, my friend.
How much improvising do you get to do?
Right. Well, it depends on the studio. So for Rockstar Games, we had 3 main writers with probably a couple dozen others. But one of the 3 main writers was the boss of the company. So not a lot of improvisation. Because I remember often our director would say, "Who wrote this?" And they'll be like, "Dan." And he went, "Oh, okay, better keep it then." In other instances, they'll be like, "Who wrote this?" It'll be Michael. "Okay, let's cut it. It's not working." But not a lot of improvisation on Red Dead. But there was a little bit, and often whatever we did, what we improvised was often more physical than with the script. You know, one of the funny things about Red Dead Redemption 2 is that the majority of the writers were British, and they often wrote the dialogue with a kind of a British dialect. But the funny thing is that it kind of worked. It kind of worked for antiquated 1890s America, you know, like saying "reckon" and whatnot, as one example. So there wasn't a lot of improvisation script-wise, but there was plenty of it physically, you know, so much stuff going on in the frame. And a lot of that was just made up on the spot by the performers. Other studios, you know, they behave much differently. And I have worked with a lot of other studios since then. And one of the biggest differences I've realized is that, you know, a lot of studios, they will hire a different actor for the in-game animations. More often than not, they'll get a stunt performer to do the in-game animations. Because, you know, just the simple walking and running, sneaking, crouching with one gun, crouching with 2 guns, crouching with 1 rifle, crouching with a shotgun, crouching with a Molotov cocktail. Some actors don't want to do that. I did. I wanted my character, I wanted to have as much ownership over my character as was possible. I wanted him to move like me as well as sound like me. So I was very grateful to Rockstar that I pretty much did almost everything you see Arthur do. That was me, except for the major stunts. And a lot of other studios don't do that. A lot of other studios will have one actor doing the in-game animation, then they'll hire the real actor to do the cut scenes, and then they'll hire another actor for the face. They're called the face model. And that's, I mean, it's great. Whatever works, you know. If it works, it works. But what I have often found is that there's little to no communication between these 3 actors. And that can lead to problems, you know. Like, if someone's whispering and trying to be really quiet, but they're walking like this at the same time. You know, it's these little inconsistencies that just, it hurts the immersion because it doesn't read right. So, yeah. Not a lot, some improvisation, but not a lot. Yes, yourself. Yeah.
In a game with the production timeline with Red Dead, which is over a number of years, how do you as an artist like branch a scene that you record years apart that a player sees 5 minutes in between?
Oh my gosh, yeah, that happened a lot too. Great question. So that's where you would ask, what did we do? Show me what we did. So many times we would be working on it and someone would come in and they'd look at me and they'd go, hey, I know you. We worked on a video game like 3 years ago, didn't we? And I'd be like, yeah, we did. It's still the same game. And then they'd look at me like, what? And I went, yeah. Not only is it the same game, it's the same scene. And then they'd be like, no way. And I'd be like, no. And he's like, I've had children since then. And I'm like, yeah, I know. So have I. But that's where the animators were really useful because they would show us what we did, and that reference was invaluable to make it seamless. You know, I often was worried about my accent. You know, would it evolve over time? Which is I didn't want it to. I wanted it to sound the same. So I would often say, hey, can you play me something from a couple of years ago just to make sure? Because to answer, some of you might ask how long I worked on that game. 5 years I worked on Red Dead Redemption 2. It's a very long contract. And a lot of games actually don't take that length of time. But Rockstar Games are very committed to detail, very committed to excellence and perfection. Plus, you know, they make a lot of money on GTA Online. And that gave us the luxury to be able to really focus on the authenticity of the performances and the immersion for the player in the world that we were trying to create. So yeah, the animators would help that. Yes, the white hat in the back, yeah.
I was wondering, was there ever a point when you were like, my character would never say this, like Arthur would never say this, or like, this doesn't make sense to me for this character, and did you ever speak up about that, or did it end up just going in the game? Sort of similar to you.
Yeah, okay, really good question. So yes, that did happen a few times. But here's the difference when you're playing the playable character versus playing a character on film. I don't know what Arthur will do because the player is controlling him. You might make Arthur a murderous lunatic, and someone else might make him someone who talks nice to his horse and feeds her apples every day. And at the beginning, I would say, nah, this doesn't feel right. But then I had to get used to the idea that I had to anticipate what the player might or mightn't do. And at the end of the day, to be really quite frank, you almost can't. So in order for that to make sense in my head, I had to come up with an Arthur that was ambiguous enough so that it would work if he was a murderous rampager or if he was a nice outlaw who gave money to the homeless. And for some instances, that was really easy because they would write specific scenes for a bad Arthur, and then they'd write it'd be a completely different scene if it was an Arthur with high honor. And that made it easier for me because so I could just, okay, this is bad Arthur, fine. But for some of the less important scenes where it could be either or, I had to figure out in my head how to come up with an Arthur that was ambiguous enough so that it made sense either way. And as I started to accept that, I did it less and less as the years went by, because I thought, well, is it possible that Arthur would do this? That's the question I started to ask myself. Not whether or not he would, but is it possible that he might? And if the answer was yes, then I would try and do it as authentically as possible. Yeah. Yes, sir, in the Burgundy wine.
Given that knowledge, you had the opportunity, several projects available, choosing between having wrapped your mind around that, is that something you're okay with now, or would you prefer to play a character that kind of gets to be totally similar throughout the whole experience?
I don't say no that much. I like work. But see, if I had the choice, I love both. You know, I'm very passionate about performance capture because of, you know, it was up to me to come up with the authentic details that would work. Like, just one silly example is like picking up a rock off of a beach, you know, and when you put it down again, just wiping the sand off of your hands and remembering to do that. Swatting away imaginary flies when you're doing a scene in the swamp. I loved that stuff. I absolutely adored it. And I still did get to do a narrative with Red Dead Redemption 2, at least. One thing that has blown my mind, though, is in the motion capture that I've done for games since Red Dead 2, I don't need to do as much, especially for the in-game animations. I remember the in-game animations, you know, just the simple things, taking weeks and weeks and weeks. The last video game I worked on, I think it all took half a day. Because you just don't need to do as much for it to recognize and have the data that it needs in order to make you move around. Also, most games aren't as sophisticated as Red Dead was. Arthur walks a certain way when he's drunk. He walks a certain way when he's injured. He walks a certain way when he's cold. You know, most games don't bother with that detail. So one of the things that, as time has gone by, the technological advancements really blow my mind. It means I don't work as many days too, but you know, that's besides the point. But yeah, I love everything. I like working in all mediums. Yeah. Yes.
Do you have a favorite scene, either for some technology that you use, or just a really fun one to record?
I mean, a lot of the scenes were great to do because of the wonderful colleagues that I had. And, you know, like I said earlier, it felt really similar to film. But there were some fun scenes that were, that were fun because it was specifically performance capture. I remember once I was a bear. There was one, there's so many of these little small interactions that you can just stumble across as you're journeying in this in-game world. And one of them would be if you come across a guy who's caught in his own bear trap, right? And you have the choice to help him and get him out, or you could just stand and watch as he's screaming in pain, you know? And the Rockstar developers thought it might be funny if you watched and stood there long enough that a bear might come and maul him as he's trapped, you know? So we did that. And I was the bear. You know, I played multiple roles in that game. If there's no dialogue, I was there most days. So and in that instance, it was a stunt performer, and they put this harness around his torso, and I shook him as hard as I could shake him. And then the really funny thing about it at the end was as soon as the director said, cut, you do what you do. You stand up and you do a T-pose. And in the corner of my eye, I see a bear up on the previs screen, standing like that. This is really funny. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Are younger people coming into the profession for performance capture? Do they teach it in schools? How does somebody break into it?
So they are starting to teach it now. Yeah. It's expensive equipment still. So it's not readily available everywhere, but they are starting to teach it now. And it's mostly incorporated for video games, although that's starting to change now with film and television as well. But most drama schools I know of do not use it yet. Most of the courses in which it's being taught is for the video game developers, and which I think is a good start, because often as the case, these animators, they need to learn communication skills. They need to learn to become directors as well as animators. They need to put on more hats now. And if they start to learn these skills in college, then that's only just going to help them. But I know in the UK that you can take a few courses, but the expensive equipment does limit it somewhat, and it doesn't make it cheap. Yeah. Yes, my friend.
Yeah, so if I were to say I don't read or I don't watch movies, I get kind of looks from people. But if I hear many people say I don't play video games, it's like, oh yeah, that's just kind of life. They're missing out on narratives that are amazing. Like, is there something that we should do to like welcome them, or do you think there's some change that you're seeing? Like, what do you think about that idea?
Oh yeah. Well, video games aren't just for kids anymore. That's for sure. I think that's been understood for maybe about 20 years, 25 years now. It's there's so many different mediums now in which stories can be told, and yeah, there's the younger generation is watching and is processing entertainment in a different way than previous generations. I don't know where it's going to fall. AI is changing everything now, and it's here to stay, whether we like it or not. And it's undeniable that it has some really useful applications, and it is a very valuable tool. And one thing I can say is that it's going to change the industry, but I don't think anyone can accurately say how just yet. The industry has had record layoffs because of AI. AI is making people redundant that I never even imagined, like coders, for example. AI can often write better code than a person now. And, you know, I wanted machines to do my dishes. I didn't want it to write my movies. But now it's looking like that's a possibility in the near future. So, you know, I personally think AI, yeah, it's a useful tool, and it is allowing smaller studios to become more competitive with the big boys. But, you know, it's also precipitated record layoffs, and it's being used as a form of theft now, too, which I really disagree with as a performer. I see Arthur online saying stuff that's horrible, you know, and that just kind of makes me sad. And when AI is being used to recreate someone's likeness or voice without their permission, you know, that's just theft. It's just theft. And I think we need more legislation to combat that. California has done some things, but there's nothing federal yet. You know, James Earl Jones, before he passed away, he sold his Darth Vader to Disney, and now he's on Fortnite. You know, I don't think he saw that coming. But you know, Disney bought the rights, so it's you can have Marilyn Monroe sing you happy birthday. You could have, oh gosh, her name's totally escaped me now. Wizard of Oz, Judy Garland. You could have Judy Garland sing you happy birthday. And Liza Minnelli let it happen. So, you know, this isn't going anywhere. But it's something that's important to address because it's not just an issue of entertainment. You know, there's a lot of people getting phone calls from their grandkids nowadays that say they need bail money, and you only need about 30 seconds of someone's voice to accurately do that. So, yeah, I've gone off on a tangent from your question, haven't I? Yeah, I don't know how. I think gaming, definitely, there are some games out there that children should never be playing, and it is a legitimate way to tell stories now, and I just look forward to that continuing and growing.
If it helps you at all, most libraries do have gaming games, switches, gaming systems for lending. So, as an institution, libraries do include that as part of storytelling.
Yeah,
So, support your local library.
absolutely. And I think it's very useful for kids too. I mean, there's some really awesome historical video games. One that comes to mind is there's this World War I video game called Valiant Hearts. If you ever get the chance, check it out. It really teaches you like what life in the trenches was. It's amazing. And, you know, it helps problem-solving skills. It helps hand-eye coordination, and I don't know about your kids, but during COVID, that was their only form of socializing in some ways. And I never thought I would say it, but everything. Obviously, as long as they're not on it all day, I love video games and I play them. When I play them, though, I call it research. That's what I tell my wife and the IRS. Are there any other questions? Yes.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to performance capture in video games, like they're here to stay. They're not going anywhere. Obviously, like I don't see them going anywhere. You don't either. But when it comes to that in film and television, it seems like only non-human characters will get a positive reaction from the audience. Like human, like there was that whole phase with Robert Zemeckis' like Beowulf and Christmas Carol and all those movies that tried to do human characters in performance capture for movies, and they weren't really received very well. Why do you think it is that movies have a harder time using human characters in performance capture than video games?
That's a good question. Well, with Polar Express, that's a good example because they hired Tom Hanks and then they made him look just like Tom Hanks. And with Beowulf, it was Ray Winston, and he looked like Sean Bean. But what's the point, of hiring an actor? Oh, but we need to know that he's Tom Hanks, so make him look like himself. It's like, well, what's the point, But it does open a very big question because, obviously casting directors are under a lot of pressure now for inclusivity and representation. And performance capture kind of makes all of that redundant, at least in a visual and technological way. The audience still has issue and they want to see, characters be represented accurately. But, I don't know. I think Polar Express is over 20 years old now, Beowulf 15. I think audiences have become a little bit more acclimated to performance capture now. The Hulk looks like Mark Ruffalo. It does kind of look like him, and we accept it now. And we're seeing more and more of it. And like I said earlier, even though it's in the wrong category, there are Emmy nominations now for performance capture roles, as Alan Tudyk did in Andor. And people were screaming for Andy Serkis to get a Best Supporting nod, which he technically wasn't, I think, allowed to. But people are starting. That's all starting to change. So I think audiences are getting more acclimated to it now. Yeah. Yes.
One more question, and then we'll wrap it up so that we can.
Okay.
You have like a capture project that you always want to do, either like as a character or is there like something that you're like, if I had unlimited budget or unlimited whatever, I would do this.
Well, there is. There's a couple of studios I would really love to work with that I haven't yet done. There's a lot of Japanese-themed stuff that I love. Hideo Kojima is a genius. I would love to work for Kojima Studios. I'd love to work for Naughty Dog. I'd love to work for Santa Monica. It was one of the first ever stories of anime, or it was a graphic novel originally back in the 70s or early 80s called Lone Wolf and Cub. I would love to do a video game about Lone Wolf and Cub. It's this wandering samurai his wife is dead, and his little son tags along with him, and he often has to protect him, and stuff like that. And it became a Japanese TV series, and it was a huge, real long manga series. I think it would make an awesome video game because samurais are cool, and everybody likes to fight with samurai swords. And when you have an objective like protecting a small boy, that can really help with gaming too. And yeah, Lone Wolf and Cub, I'd love to do that.
Thank you, Roger.
My pleasure.
I'm going to